Deep within a Capcom planning room, a game was greenlit. A new type of game. One focused around dark, scary elements, and something they were calling 3D horror. This idea was very similar and actually very inspired by yet another Capcom title called Sweet Home, a computer game released in 1989. Still, while almost a pseudo-sequel, this new title was meant to be greater, something worth seeing, and so Biohazard, more commonly known as Resident Evil, was born. The year was 1993 when legendary video game designer Tokyo Fujiwara called up a name you might recognize, Shinji Mikami, and asked him if he'd like to work on a horror game. Mikami instantly said yes to the offer, seeing it as a big chance in the industry and a break from the titles he'd been stuck with, as in his words, he was super frustrated. And so development behind this Sweet Home inspired game began, with Fujiwara in the producer's seat and Mikami at the head of the project as director. Quickly, the newly assembled team realized Sony's upcoming PlayStation would be the best way to go and allowed them to make Biohazard the best it could be. While debatably the best system of its time, the PlayStation was far from perfect, forcing the team to find tricks around issues and to make tons of changes throughout development. Notable changes like 3D backgrounds being forced to be super simple. And while the gameplay did eventually find itself coming together after numerous issues and changes, the story struggled. So much so that the game was all but done before they really worked on any of the story elements. While yes, obviously there was a basic story made by Mikami, it was super messy and rather bad, revolving around a group of 4 characters who are after an evil scientist. And if you doubt it might have been bad, when brought up to Capcom they repeatedly told Mikami he has to do more. While some ideas from these original drafts still exist in game, everything really changed when Kenichi Iwao was brought in to help with the story. Iwao improved upon and expanded everything Mikami had done. Once paranormal plot points were changed into the T-Virus storyline, characters were completely redesigned, and that evil scientist changed into Wesker, someone the developers instantly fell in love with. From there, Biohazard, or Resident Evil as it was called overseas due to licensing issues, would eventually be ready for release. With a never-before-seen type of gameplay, live action scenes, and thrilling horror, Resident Evil was guaranteed to be a success. And so it was. Releasing in March of 1996, Resident Evil instantly became a must-have, with the genre name even created to describe the game, survival horror. But that's not all. Resident Evil was so popular, it went on to be re-released. Not once, not on one console, but re-released on the Sega Saturn, PC, and even on the Nintendo DS. The survival horror icon even found itself getting a remake for the GameCube, the later remastered this version being the main topic of today. And so that remake. Remember how the PlayStation console's shortcomings led to tons of changes and challenges for the original game? Well, upon seeing the GameCube and examples of what that console could do, Mikami decided on remaking the original game. Not only just to improve the game, but to bring it closer to his original image. This was the perfect time too. Resident Evil 3 had just released and other studios were handling the series' spin-offs, meaning there was now a big void that needed to be filled. And the result was Resident Evil 4 and said remake of the very first game. The chance had finally come for Mikami to fulfill his original vision for the original Biohazard, and this all began with the graphics. Not only were cutscenes now fully motion captured and animated in 3D, but the backgrounds became far more beautiful and detailed. Even small details like blood spatter were focused on extensively. Though this game was looking better than ever, Mikami being a horror geek wanted to make sure the game never lost that feeling, and if anything it was even stronger. This led to tons of silly arguments between Mikami and Katakai, the art director of the game, with the quote I love being, "I think everyone has to have their own opinion, but Mikami's way of thinking about fear is way above me. He gave me a lot of sharp points, and he also labeled me as stubborn. Though, this mindset prioritizing the fear factor would be proved to be for the best. This idea would touch every element of the game and turn the already scary title into something terrifying. Everything mattered to Mikami and his team. The simplest sounds were changed. Surfaces were tweaked until they looked just the right amount of dusty. Zombies were morphed, not only to look better, but more importantly to look hungry. And character models were finally given unique defining features, something only possible due to new technological upgrades. Point is, Mikami and his team had made many great changes, paying a lot of special attention to details and Mikami's idea of fear. But soon enough, the team realized that in the current state, this supposed remake was only a remake visually. Sure, the game looked absolutely beautiful now, but at the core, nothing had really changed. And so they set their sights on making even more adjustments to the game, even if that meant development would take longer, when they were already behind and people were stuck in the office for months on end. This led to even more changes, with the biggest changes being to enemies, like the creation of Lisa and the expansion of that storyline. And also to the soundtrack, with most songs appearing in-game being reorganized or brand new entirely. Eventually, after issues with deadlines, tons of changes, and a whole lot more fear, the Resident Evil Remake was complete and ready for stores. And so in March of 2002, it launched to great success as expected. Years down the line, in 2014, the RE Remake would receive a shiny HD remaster. This being the version in stores today and the version we're talking about today. With that and all of the other RE remakes, rumors continuously swirl about a new remake for this game, a second one. And so, before it happens, I'd say it's the perfect time to look back at the remake of the original survival horror, where a simple investigation mission turns into a nightmare, one where a small team is forced to enter the survival horror.
Bizarre murder cases have recently occurred in Raccoon City. There are outlandish reports of families being attacked by a group of about 10 people. Victims were apparently eaten.
An opening that leads you straight to fear, and it does so in such a short time. Quickly it gives you the rundown, STARS team, weird case to investigate, and gives you a good reason to be stuck in this mansion and an even greater reason to not want to leave. Video game dogs. This opening is unnerving and frightening, but doesn't really tell you much about what Resident Evil will be like besides that it's scary. But that's because it wants you to figure that out yourself. First though, you gotta pick your character. Either Chris Redfield, former Air Force certified badass, or Jill Valentine, potentially even cooler wife material. Jill seems to be the most popular choice and is also the character I picked. As well, I love my strong women in games, and Jill is just that. It's cool to note that Jill has received Delta Force training, and if you know anything about that, then you understand they really wanted to make her the coolest woman to ever exist. It seems they assumed new players would like Jill more too, since she's the game's easy mode, while Chris is the hard mode. But more on this later. As you begin your trek through the mansion, you find your first zombie, as it turns around revealing its disgusting, degraded face with nothing but eating you on its mind. It's definitely a scene that sent a bit of a chill through me on my first playthrough, but what's more frightening is that when you killed the zombie and go back to the hall, everyone seems to have disappeared. At least on Chris's story. Jill is accompanied by Barry, but it's still very alarming that Wesker has disappeared out of nowhere. Regardless, the game has dropped you headfirst into a frightening situation where you are now all alone in this humongous mansion. By now, you've had plenty of time to tinker with the controls. And while you don't have to worry about tank controls in the remake as they offer a completely different control scheme, it's still important to mention. They were the only option in the original game. In my case, the biggest reason I picked up the remake first is because it's more modern and I was really scared of tank controls. Trying the scheme in other games, not loving it, led me to the unfair assumption it would be the same. But it's really not that bad. While I didn't stick with tank controls my whole entire playthrough, giving them a chance and being surprised by them made me even more excited to really get into the original 1996 game, a choice I was super grateful for at the time. These controls were made for the original PlayStation controller, and if you've ever used that controller, you'd instantly realize why tank controls exist. There's no analog stick. Once you forget about that stick, get used to not having it, and get a basic understanding of these controls themselves, it becomes a pretty fun way to play these games. A way I really recommend if you plan to revisit this remake. From there, you're left to explore the mansion on your own, and between the creepy environments, jump scares, and numerous notes, it's obvious something is going on here. Something you can only begin to learn about as you fight your way through zombies and solve puzzles. Lots of puzzles. From collecting strange masks to close calls with traps, the mansion is rather dangerous, and the only way to progress is through the numerous puzzles. The puzzles themselves are actually not that complicated, but wonderfully thought out for how simple they are. And they're easily some of my favorite in the series because of how well they fit into their setting. Most of the time, these puzzles are quite easy. Things like linking the weird masks to the strange statues in the graveyard, or inspecting items to see if they can open, unlock, be used in any way. Even if you do have no idea where something goes or what to do, you always have the well thought out mapping system to help you. I've always loved Resident Evil maps because they seem to be built with the idea that you should always be able to look at your map and instantly figure out what you need to do if you need to. There's also no waypoints, no symbols, no annoying icons, but a simple system that is very clear. Areas you haven't checked are blocked out with gray, areas that you can't open blocked out with red, and if you've reached an area, the color of said area will reflect if you've done everything in that area. This basically never gives you the chance to be overly confused. With the simplicity and a system like this, you could get away with pushing the player through the game without much exposition. Not only keeping up this strange, creepy atmosphere, but giving you a feeling of reward when you figure things out, because it's all on your own. This is something that bothers me with some of the other games. If you tell me explicitly what to do but keep it in the form of a puzzle, it sometimes ends up feeling dumb when I figure it out, which isn't very fun as a player, obviously. As you're left to do these puzzles, the zombies continue to attack in search of food. And something I've always loved about early Resident Evil zombies is the fact that they come back. Not respawn, but literally get back up. Unless you explode the head or cover the zombie in fire, they will get up at some point. Whether it's the next time you enter that room, or if you go into it hours later, they will come back. Though it's not like they'll come back as a normal zombie, no, but as a Crimson Head, a stronger and faster zombie. They will hit you twice before you get a single shot in and will easily chase you down if you run, giving you no choice but to waste more resources and kill them again. This is a really smart design choice on their part because this is one of the scariest parts of the game that never really gets a chance to get old. You can fully kill every zombie, but then you'll quickly run out of resources. You can knock them all down and try and remember who can, who can't get up, but then that's random. It can be 10 minutes to hours till they get back up. Eventually, you will find yourself in a scenario where you get caught. Then, sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where you hear a noise from another room. The fact that they can just get back up leads to thoughts like, am I gonna have to deal with a zombie when I step out of here? Or sometimes they just won't let you think, they won't even give you the chance, and they will bust through the door. It's a really good and effective scare tactic. I believe this type of gameplay mechanic also exists in RE2, 3, it might exist in 0, I don't really remember, but I know later entries like 4, 5, and 6 went very action heavy, and since then we really haven't seen this unique system make a return. I really don't know why. I think most people would agree that it's fun and a good way to keep gameplay fresh, and considering how horror heavy 7 and 8 went, I think this would have been a perfect gameplay mechanic to have in those games. Now, having spent plenty of time in the mansion, the game pushes you in the direction of the first boss fight, and upon entering the doorway that'll lead you there, you encounter Richard, bitten up and mauled by a giant snake. Just like the opening of the game, this section is different between characters. Though, no matter who you play, you have the option to help Richard by finding him a serum. Richard is part of the STARS Bravo team, and in Chris's story he's joined by Rebecca, my favorite character who just like him is part of the STARS Bravo team. Regardless if you help Richard or not, it doesn't really matter. Sadly, he's one of those characters that was created to die, as no matter what you do, he will die at some point in the game. I think he has something like 5 death moments. Poor dude. Continuing past Richard and deeper into the nasty hallway, you'll find Yawn, the giant snake and first boss. Upon beating Yawn, you'll collapse, finding yourself poisoned just like Richard. Where if you're playing as Jill, you'll full on pass out, giving us one of my favorite cutscenes in the game.
Barry? Barry?
While in Chris's version, rather than passing out, you switch to Rebecca, where you have to find the serum to save Chris. This is pretty interesting and sticks out a bunch, as while they follow the same rough story, Chris and Jill's playthroughs are actually quite different, this becoming more apparent than ever at this point. At first, it seems like these differences might only apply to story, but I was actually really surprised when I began my playthrough as Chris. What I thought was just going to be a normal speedrun playthrough with different characters being the only thing different, quickly turned into a game of inventory management and even more surprise. My first playthrough was with Jill, who receives a lockpick from Barry, someone who doesn't appear at all in Chris's story. She's considered the easy mode, as she gets better defensive items, more inventory slots, and even gets to skip a whole entire boss fight. While Chris, the game's hard mode, has a lighter by default, less inventory slots, and has to fight a boss that Jill can skip because he's too dumb to mix chemicals. At least he gets Rebecca. She doesn't appear at all in Jill's story. The smaller inventory really got me at first though. The route I learned as Jill no longer was as effective because I was stuck trying to manage everything I could carry. Another thing is the loss of lockpicks. While not nearly as game-changing as the inventory, it forces you to look extra hard for those little keys you'll probably never find all of, leaving you with less resources in the end. Each character has their own pros and cons when it comes to gameplay, but I think it really does come down to personal preference. And the same can really be said for their own story bits. I ended up liking Chris's story much more as I really like Rebecca and she felt super involved. Between offering you healing whenever you need it or helping you play the piano, she's a very pleasant and calming addition in a scary ass game. Barry, another STARS agent, sticks with Jill, and while he isn't as involved as Rebecca, there is the plot of Wesker holding his family hostage for assistance. This plot is interesting in the way that you get to choose whether you forgive him or not. If you do forgive him, he helps you. He helps you at the end of the game. But if not, you get a brand new weapon. It's kind of a win-win regardless of what you choose. Still, I wasn't too attached to the character. In the end, these character changes serve their purpose well, making Jill and Chris feel completely different and separate from one another. Each character has their definitive gameplay differences as well as story differences, creating reason for you to play through the game multiple times to explore every single one of them, which is a pretty smart tactic. After all, as a first time player, I assumed their stories would be copy-paste of each other. When I learned that they weren't, what was going to be just a look at Chris's character turned into a whole playthrough as his character. They must have known too how well this works, and I imagine at the time the idea was pretty well received, as this concept would return for Resident Evil 2. Continuing on, and as you leave the mansion, the horror really kicks it up a notch. Up to this point, you've been cooped up in a strange mansion full of mysteries and mazes. You're basically stuck with nothing to go on besides slight mentions of what may be going on here. And when you finally do get to leave, it's like, it can't get much worse than the mansion. Then it does. You wander into a dark forest full of overgrown greenery covering the already twisted pathways. Worst of all, there's weird ambiance and nightmarish noises coming from the only available pathway. You're left with no choice but to wander into this cabin and explore, and upon trying to leave, you're attacked. You find yourself attacked by the source of the strange noises, Lisa, an entity completely original to the remake. Lisa was originally created during the writing of the 1996 version of the game and was meant to be found only in the game's documents. Towards the end of development and upon reviewing said documents, it was decided they contradict too much with others, ending up with Lisa's existence being scrapped from the game completely. This wasn't all for Lisa though, as when creating the remake and the problem of not having enough new elements came up, the team took a look back at some of the old content that never made the cut in the original game. And so, from that, Lisa was brought back. Not only in name though, not on a piece of paper, a document, but actually in-game as an enemy. This choice gave us this terrifying, groaning enemy that has suffered more than any other character in this remake. You've heard about this enemy in notes before, but at the moment there's really no time to think about that. You're cornered, with no choice but to do anything possible to escape from this Silent Hill-like creature. I only say Silent Hill because that's what her design really reminds me of, but her story is also morbid in a way I expect from that series. Lisa's father was the one tasked with creation of the mansion, just a normal guy doing his job. And upon completion of the mansion, his family would be invited to stay there. So Lisa and her mother traveled there early while her father finished another job. Though this would prove to be a tragic mistake. From the moment of their arrival, Lisa and her mother were experimented on and injected with all sorts of the virus, causing both of them to immediately deteriorate. Escape wasn't really an option either, as when Lisa's mother tried, she was immediately executed. And so was Lisa's father. He arrived, realized what was going on, and eventually died in the mansion's tunnels. This just left poor Lisa to be subjected to an endless amount of torment. The worst part is that while she mentally deteriorated quickly, she was a great test subject, and so they kept her alive. Researchers would then impersonate poor Lisa's dead mother to experiment on her, the only person she remembered and someone she was super attached to. This began a series of incidents where an enraged Lisa would rip the faces off of these workers in an effort to return her mother's face. Eventually, after years of torture and experimentation, we're talking like almost 30 long years, the researchers decided that she wasn't of use anymore and she would be executed. Still, poor Lisa didn't die. After all that experimentation, she had great regenerative abilities, and so she was left on her own, near death, with her only goal being to look for her mother. Upon understanding this, it all makes a bit more sense. Why she chases you out of the cabin, why she later chases you through the underground passages, and especially why she tries to attack you near the coffin. She's just a kid looking for her mother that was taken from her, and she hates that you're interrupting that. Throughout the game, she never even really tries to hurt you. In her first appearance, she knocks you out and leaves you to run away when she could have easily killed you or just chased you down, leading to the implication that she might not be that bad, but a sad product of this overarching evil plot that involved her and her parents. We see this best when we find ourselves under the mansion and next to a strange coffin. She attacks you, like seriously attacks you, trying to hurt you this time. And upon opening the coffin, it all becomes clear. We understand why. That coffin held her mother, at least what was left of her, what she's basically been looking for this entire time, therefore giving her no reason to be after us anymore, and so she jumps off and we never see Lisa again. Lisa was one of my favorite parts of the game. While absolutely terrifying the first time around, the second the scares wear off and you look beneath the surface, things quickly turn tragic. Her character is very unexpected in the way you wouldn't imagine what appears to be a simple enemy or boss to have an in-depth backstory. After all, the shark boss you also encounter in this time frame is literally an infected shark. Why wouldn't this Lisa be any different? Then, as I said, when you look beneath the surface, it all changes. It becomes obvious Lisa isn't evil like Wesker or hungry like zombies, but something else. Something very close to the rest of our cast. I think you could go even as far as saying she's just as human as Jill or Chris. After all, she's been living like a person in this cabin, evidenced by the fireplace that's been kept up with, and the fact that her goal is simply to find her missing mom is more human than anything. I think Lisa is a great reminder that our cast isn't the only people wrapped up into this deranged plot. Something that's even more understandable as you approach the lab underneath the mansion. Upon opening the strong steel doors and entering the dark lab, everything sinks in. The incidents of people being eaten, the disgusting mutated creatures we've seen, the constant mentions of the virus. It all came from here, this lab. We've reached ground zero. The game quickly takes advantage of this realization by pushing the story onto you more than anything else. There's less puzzles, with the ones available providing exposition for the overarching story, being a way to lead you to story devices like notes. Enemies too. As with the exception of zombies, all the enemy types we've seen throughout the game are gone in favor of a new enemy. A parasitic-like creature that serves as a way to hammer in the idea of a strange virus rampaging the area. Also, most obvious is the uncomfortable ambience, pushed up a notch just to make sure you're uneasy and truly understand this is a terrifyingly important area. As you wander through the destroyed lab, you find personnel names, documents, videos, all leading to the realization that the mansion was a front for bioweapon research. From there, something obviously went wrong and it caused an outbreak. It's all very easy to figure out. But something doesn't make sense. One piece is at odds with all of the others. Something you probably picked up by now. Wesker. Wesker has been your ally for the whole game. At least that's what he wanted you to think. The truth is, Wesker has been against you the whole time. He brought you and your allies, the whole STARS team, out to this mansion to be eliminated. After the virus broke out in the lab, Wesker, working for Umbrella, was tasked to collect secret data and destroy the evidence of everything that occurred there, as well as removing his team, leaving no witnesses and no STARS team to look into any other incidents. This is a betrayal that's so easy to see. He disappears right away at the beginning, a point where strength in numbers should be a given. He continues to only appear from then on at crucial points, almost like he's checking on you, checking if you still walk. At the end of the game, in the lab, if you pay a lot of attention, it will definitely become clear he's a traitor. if you already weren't assuming so. Not only is he seen in pictures in the lab, but if you do free the other character, they'll tell you what Wesker's up to.
Chris?
Jill.
Chris, Wesker's the...
I know.
As you ride the elevator up to finally approach Wesker, you can be joined by the other STARS member. Barry if you're Jill, and Rebecca if you're Chris. You can also go up alone if you choose not to give Barry his gun or don't save Rebecca. Funny enough, choosing to do this removes the second tyrant fight, making the game easier if you sacrifice your teammates. Either way, you confront Wesker, where he reveals his plans to destroy STARS and how he plans to betray Umbrella, explaining to us how our characters found themselves wrapped up into this unfortunate plot, just like poor Lisa from before. This scene though really showcases how likable Wesker is, even though he's the big villain of this game's story. Even in the original game, he's super likable. Like the same, even if the original voice acting was interesting.
That's right. This is the ultimate life form. Tyrant! Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
That's just so out of context. I'm sorry, you just can't make a Resident Evil video without mentioning the original voices. But even then, Wesker was such a loved character by the developers, he was done perfect in this remake. Wesker's next move is to release the Tyrant in an act of ego, to prove this greatness he's been involved with, but it quickly goes wrong. The Tyrant slams him across the room, leading to the assumption that he's dead. This begins the final boss fight against the Grand Tyrant, the latest and strongest organic bioweapon. Upon its defeat, Wesker disappears and the facility begins the self-destruction process. Here you can free Jill if you're playing as Chris, Chris if you're Jill, and escape with the other STARS members if you chose to let them live. If you chose to ignore them and let them die, didn't trust Barry, left the other character in the cell, you can ride the elevator to the surface and escape the nightmare instantly. But if you did the opposite of any of these things, you and your partners must fight Tyrant again. I think this is a really fun choice for the game to give you. I personally saved everybody both playthroughs, but there's really incentives to do either. Do you be a nice guy and save everybody? It might cost you time and you're gonna have to do an extra boss, but it is the good thing to do. Or do you move as fast as you can and ignore everyone? You unfortunately will have to watch everyone's demise, but at least you get out of there as fast as possible. Either way, beating Tyrant once, twice, you finally have the chance to signal for the helicopter to come down and get you. As the time ticks down and the facility grows closer to exploding, you're just barely able to escape, allowing you and the last remaining members of STARS to leave the nightmare. I grew up with Resident Evil. From the second I picked up the 7th game, keep in mind I'm a mid-2000s kid, I became obsessed with the series. I already had a strong love for horror movies and scary things, so when I discovered there were games that were even scarier and better yet interactive, it's like everything clicked. I instantly fell in love with everything Resident Evil. Meaning the first Resident Evil is obviously part of that. The first Resident Evil is a legendary game in the way it's been talked about, everything it's inspired, and just how well it's done, selling over 12 million copies between all of the versions and becoming the start of what has become Capcom's best-selling franchise. While this wasn't the first game of the series I played, matter of fact it was one of the last, the first Resident Evil still stands up to everything else they've made. Even 7 mainline games later and more spin-offs than I can count. Point is, it's a great game, one that's still more than worth it to play today. And there's so many different ways to play it, all with their own differences and exclusivities. Whichever one you consider the right way can be the right way, but for me, it'll always be this remake. To me, the remake is their final vision, the version they quoted multiple times as the best. The version that would go on to become the definitive way to play this classic for decades, and the one I absolutely loved being able to focus on today. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed watching me play through Resident Evil from my point of view, the things I picked up on, the things I enjoyed the most, and just enjoyed listening to me talk about one of my favorite game series. I might make videos on the other ones, who knows. I think I'm gonna go through Resident Evil 0 next, which is one I actually have never played. So yeah, as always, please show support, leave a like, leave a comment. I always love reading the comments, and tell me what you think. I also have a second channel. If you're not subscribed, take a look. I upload achievement hunting related videos. If that's interesting to you, if that's something you like to do, like to watch, see me there. I'll see you. But until then, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching the video, and let me know you watched to the end.